My name is Logan. I'm 23 years old, and I'm an engineering student at the University of San Diego. As much as my life was marked by the routine of studying, there were some surprises to come. I didn't know at the time that the weekend I was about to start would be a turning point in my life, a weekend in which I had a relationship with my university friend's father. If you're curious to know what's going to happen, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end so you don't miss any details. The story began in a simple and ordinary way. My friend from university, James, invited me to work at his house in La Jolla. We weren't great friends, but we had always been classmates. The project we had to complete together was demanding and would extend over the weekend, so he suggested that I come to his house to work more calmly. La Jolla was no ordinary neighborhood. It was far from the hustle and bustle of San Diego, with its quiet streets and houses that looked like they were straight out of an architecture magazine. When I arrived at James's residence, I was surprised. It wasn't the kind of house you'd expect to find in a neighborhood like that. It was large, modern, and surrounded by an impeccable garden. Even the path to the front door looked like something out of a movie. Perfectly trimmed grass, exotic plants in the corners, and a glass facade that let the elegant interior shine through. I rang the bell, and soon the door opened. James was there, smiling as always, a quiet guy with light brown hair and an easy smile. He was wearing a soccer shirt, something very simple, but which suited the relaxed atmosphere he always brought. "Hey Logan, glad you could make it. Let's get to work. I'm sure it'll be easier here than in my apartment," he said, opening the door and letting me through. The house was quiet, with soft light coming through the large windows, illuminating the minimalist but tasteful furniture. The smell of fresh coffee wafted through the air. It was clear that James had a good quality of life, and I could tell this not only by the objects and the decoration, but by the way he behaved, with a lightness that I found strange for someone so young. He seemed to have everything under control, something I rarely got to feel in my own life. We moved on to the living room, where a large coffee table was set up for work. It was a table made of dark wood, and on it were our materials: laptops, notebooks, some diagrams and graphs. The atmosphere was calm, with an impressive view of the sea outside. The work started flowing well. James had an incredible ability to divide up the tasks, so that time passed without us realizing it. Over the course of the day, the conversation between us grew closer. We talked about the project, of course, but also about our lives, our families, plans for the future. James told me a bit more about his life in La Jolla and what his parents did. I knew he was well off, but I had no idea how much influence his family had. James spoke naturally about it, but at no time did he seem to be bragging. On the contrary, he seemed to want to maintain a certain distance from this perfect image of his life. Then, during one of his coffee breaks, he mentioned his father's name. "My father must be around here at some point," he said, with a shy smile. "He's usually in the office or watching something on TV." James seemed a little uncomfortable talking about his father, which made me curious. I knew that his father, John, was a successful businessman, but I didn't know much more. James always mentioned him briefly, never going into depth. About an hour later, while we were in the middle of a discussion about the best approach to presenting our work, the door to the room opened. A middle-aged man walked in, with an imposing posture and an expression that showed seriousness. He had dark brown hair with a few gray hairs at the temples, and his gaze seemed attentive to everything around him. His name was John, James's father. "Hello, Logan. It's nice to finally meet you," he said, holding out his hand. His voice was deep and assured, and when he shook my hand, he had a firm grip, as if he already knew who I was without having to ask. I was surprised by John's presence. He wasn't just your typical successful businessman. He had something more, an aura that went beyond financial power. The way he moved around the house, the way he spoke, everything about him seemed to command respect. He watched me for a moment longer than I expected, which made me feel a little uncomfortable, but soon he sat down in one of the armchairs next to me. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work," he said, with a slight smile, but with a tone of voice that suggested he wasn't interested in knowing much about the project. He was just there out of politeness. "No, of course not," replied James, more animated than I'd imagined, trying to give the impression that the work was going very well. "We're just doing some final revisions, but we'll be finished soon." The conversation continued politely, but I couldn't stop thinking about John. He was there, but he always seemed to stand apart, as if he didn't really need to be involved with anything around him. His words were measured, and he had a way of looking at people as if he was analyzing each of us with a particular interest. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't identify, but I was beginning to feel it. James soon got back to work, and I concentrated on my laptop. But I couldn't help noticing how John moved around the house, how calmly he occupied the space. Sometimes he would stop to look out of the window, seeming to absorb the scenery around him as if he were meditating. Evening came, and with it, the feeling of tiredness settled over me. James suggested we go to bed, as we had worked all day. He showed me the guest room, which was just as imposing and elegant, but in a more welcoming way, with a quiet and intimate atmosphere. I said goodbye to James and his father, and then went to bed, waiting for the tiredness to take over. I closed my eyes, and although my body was tired, my mind was agitated. Something about the house, about the way John had behaved, was making me uncomfortable, but at the same time intrigued. Perhaps it was just the atmosphere, the contrast between my simple lifestyle and the opulence of La Jolla, but I felt as if something was about to happen, something I couldn't anticipate. And there, in James's house, with the gentle wind beating against the window, I closed my eyes and tried to relax. I didn't know it, but what came next would change everything forever. Night fell slowly, and I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. My body wanted to rest, but my mind was agitated, restless, a strange sensation taking hold of me. I had slept very little the night before, and the effort to work on the project with James during the day had been intense. But while my body had asked for a rest, something inside me couldn't switch off. I couldn't stop thinking about John. His presence made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't pinpoint. Perhaps it was the way he always seemed to stand apart, as if he was watching everything from a higher position, as if he could control every move inside that house. Or maybe it was his way of looking at me, deeper than I was used to. He seemed to analyze me in a way that made me uncomfortable, but at the same time, a part of me felt a growing curiosity. When James suggested we go to sleep, I automatically agreed. He showed me to the guest room, which was one of the quietest places I'd ever seen. The mattress was soft, the sheets were made of the finest cotton, and the room had a cozy feel, almost as if it were hugging me. But despite the physical comfort, my brain couldn't slow down. I knew the next morning would bring more work, but there was something in the air that kept me alert. I lay on the bed, trying to relax, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. John's face appeared in my mind, his posture imposing, his gaze penetrating. I turned to the side, trying to push the image away, but I couldn't. Suddenly, the sound of the house becoming too quiet gave me a chill. I heard the distant rustle of a TV program coming from the living room, like a muffled echo. It snapped me out of my attempt to fall asleep. I didn't know what drew me, but a part of me found itself getting out of bed without thinking. It was as if some kind of invisible force was pulling me out of the room. With a sigh, I headed for the door, trying not to make a sound. The corridor was dark, but I could still see the glow of the soft light from the living room filtered through the cracks in the ajar door. When I got closer, I saw that the television was on. The cold, fluorescent light from the screen illuminated the room in a hypnotic way, creating elongated shadows on the furniture. If you like this story, leave a like because the ending is even better. Don't miss it. I knew I was doing something wrong, something out of place. It was too late, and I was curious. My mind knew I should go back to the bedroom, but my body seemed to follow on its own, as if something was drawing me there. I let myself stand still for a moment in the dim light, watching. John was there, sitting on the sofa, his head tilted slightly forward, watching what looked like a movie. He didn't notice me immediately, and I stood there watching him in silence. The atmosphere was imbued with a strange sensation, and I didn't know how to react to it. The house was silent, except for the low sound of the television. I realized that he was watching something different, something I hadn't expected to find there. The images on the screen were between two men, the kind of scene you see in adult movies, but in a different way. He seemed completely absorbed in it, without any sign of embarrassment or shame. That scene, the way he was watching it, and the atmosphere in which it was all happening, became more important to me than anything rational at that moment. I felt like I was watching something very intimate, very personal. The tension in the room, the way he seemed oblivious to everything around him, was palpable. I wanted to get out of there, but somehow I couldn't move. Then something happened, something I wasn't prepared for. When John noticed me, his gaze met mine. It was one of those looks that seemed to penetrate deep into you, as if he was seeing someone's soul. I froze in place. He seemed calm, but there was something in his gaze that I couldn't decipher. He didn't seem surprised nor bothered. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Are you awake, Logan?" he said, his voice soft but commanding. There was no anger or surprise, just a quiet curiosity in his voice. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, unable to look away. "I didn't want to bother you," I finally said, my voice low, trembling. "I just heard the TV and decided to see what it was." "You didn't bother me," he interrupted, with a discreet smile. "If you want, you can sit down. There's no need to hide." His voice didn't sound aggressive, but there was an authority in it that made me feel small somehow. I hesitated for a moment. I knew something was wrong, but at the same time, a part of me didn't want to leave. A part of me wanted to understand more about what was happening there, and, not knowing what to do, I slowly moved over to the sofa, sitting down at the opposite end from where he was. I could still see the glow of the screen reflected in his eyes. The atmosphere became even more charged. Shadows danced on the walls, and the sound of the TV seemed to intensify, filling the silence between us. I didn't know what to do with my racing mind, but I couldn't take my eyes off what was happening there, as if I were trapped in a kind of hypnosis. He seemed so comfortable in that environment, so in control of everything. I, on the other hand, felt lost. John didn't say anything. He just watched me, as if he was waiting for something. But what was I waiting for? What was he expecting from me? I didn't know. The tension that was growing between the two of us was something I couldn't process. Every second seemed to be more charged, more dense, and then he spoke once again with a calm that seemed supernatural. "Are you comfortable? There's no problem with you being here. If you want to stay, I can show you other movies. If you're interested." I didn't know what to say. My heart was beating fast and my mind was confused. I had never imagined being in this situation. I never imagined being in that house, in that dark room with James's father, in such a charged atmosphere, watching something I didn't understand, with conflicting emotions pounding in my chest. My mind was screaming at me to get out of there, but my body seemed to want to stay. Curiosity consumed me. I knew that at that moment, my life was about to change. I didn't know in what way, but I knew that what was happening at that moment would remain etched in my memory forever. The room was almost completely dark, except for the glow of the television, which cast shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The muffled sound of the scene on the screen filled the room, creating a strange, charged atmosphere. I found myself standing still, not knowing what to do, still sitting on the sofa on the other side of the living room. John was there, so immersed in the scene that he didn't seem to notice the growing tension in the air. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care. He had this power, this unsettling calm that made it clear that he was in control. There was something about him, a presence that made me question my own certainties. I had never felt so uncomfortable and, at the same time, so fascinated. "Are you all right, Logan?" John's voice softly cut through the silence. He turned slightly towards me, his deep-set eyes reflecting the light from the screen. There was a slight curve to his lips, but it was a smile of a kind I'd never seen before. It was neither welcoming nor friendly. It was both welcoming and distant, almost as if he was testing my limits. That question seemed simple, but it carried weight. He knew I was there. He knew I was feeling uncomfortable, but he didn't care. It was as if he was taking a step back, waiting for me to make the decision to leave or to stay. The tension was in the air, the atmosphere charged with something unspoken, something I couldn't understand. I'd never connected with men before, but John was fascinating me. Yes, I am. My voice came out weaker than I had intended. I looked at him, trying to find some clue as to what he wanted from me, but John was a rock. His eyes didn't move from the screen, and his posture was relaxed, as if he was completely at ease in the situation. I wanted to leave. I wanted to go back to my room, to the safety of my bed, where I wouldn't be tempted to keep watching that wonderful man. But at the same time, there was a force preventing me from moving. My curiosity, my confusion, my attraction to that moment, all kept me trapped. It was a battle inside me, and I didn't know who was winning. "I can change the channel if you prefer," John said, with disturbing calm. He seemed so calm, so serene, as if he were offering a way out, a relief from the strangeness of the moment. But his voice was loaded with something else, something I couldn't identify. "But if you want to see more, I can too." He looked at me again, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, but also held me even tighter. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I stood there, my heart beating fast, my mind full of questions I couldn't answer. What did he want from me? Did he know what I was feeling? Did he know about my confusion, my discomfort? "Have you had relationships with other men, Mr. John?" I whispered, more to myself than to him, although I knew he had probably heard. My voice was hoarse. I didn't know if I was talking about myself, the situation, or my own emotions. But at that moment, something inside me seemed to be breaking. John didn't answer right away. He remained silent, but his eyes were fixed on me, as if he was waiting for me to find the words, or perhaps he was waiting for me to make a decision. The silence between us was heavy, almost palpable. I felt like a cornered animal trapped in a cage of my own mind. "Haven't you ever been curious, Logan?" His low voice cut through the silence with a curious tone, almost as if he was trying to understand what was going on with me. He didn't sound aggressive, but his question carried something else, something I didn't know how to interpret. "Curiosity?" I forced myself to ask, although my voice came out weaker than I wanted. He smiled in an almost imperceptible way, a corner smile, but he didn't answer immediately. His answer seemed to be implicit in his presence, in the unspoken words, in the way he looked at me. "About a lot of things, Logan. About who you are, about what you want." He seemed very sure of himself, and the way he phrased the questions made me feel like I was being watched, analyzed. There was something, an invisible force, holding me there, forcing me to face the questions I didn't want to ask myself. "I've never thought about it," I said, finally finding my words, even though I was completely lost. "I've never thought about these things." He just looked at me unhurriedly, as if waiting for me to come to some conclusion. The silence, the distance between us was growing. I was trying to understand, trying to find some way of distancing myself from that feeling, but I couldn't. I was standing there, immersed in my feelings. I was there, immersed in something I didn't know how to control. I accidentally looked at the TV screen and saw what was being shown. Images that seemed to be a continuation of the same scene, but now with an intensity that I didn't know whether to feel ashamed of or curious about. Part of me wanted to look in another direction, but another part wanted to understand. I wanted to see more, to explore this unknown territory. My body was at war with my mind, and I no longer knew what was going on. That's when I turned and went towards John to kiss him. "You can't tell James about this, no way." He smiled and promised that it would be our secret. After we kissed, we went off to have sex. Before I knew it, 2 hours had passed, and I went back to my room so that James wouldn't wake up. The next morning came with a soft light, filtered through the curtains in my room. I was lying down, my eyes still heavy with tiredness from the night before, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. What had happened last night, in that room, with John? Every scene seemed to play itself out over and over again in my head. The sound of the TV, the way he looked at me, his words. I didn't know what to think. I got out of bed with the feeling that something was changing inside me, something I couldn't control, as if an unknown desire was beginning to form. The discomfort mixed with curiosity still consumed me, but at the same time, there was a strange attraction to it all, something I couldn't deny. I went downstairs, trying not to make a sound. The house was silent, but something told me I wasn't alone. Deep down, I knew that something was about to happen, something I couldn't predict. When I entered the kitchen, I found James preparing coffee as if nothing strange had happened. He was so relaxed, so calm, that he couldn't imagine what had happened between me and his father. He smiled when he saw me, but his expression was casual, without any sign of concern. "Good morning, Logan. Did you sleep well?" The question was simple, but for some reason I felt a weight in it. I knew he had no idea what had happened. I didn't know what to say, so I just answered with a nervous smile. "Yeah, well, just a bit tired still. I guess work yesterday was heavier than I thought." James laughed, as if there was nothing else to worry about. But in the background, in the living room, I saw him. John was there, sitting as calmly as ever. He was reading a newspaper, but his eyes followed me, as if he knew exactly what was going on in my mind. The silence between us was heavy, dense. "Are you all right, Logan?" His voice, soft and calm, cut through the air. He didn't need to ask. I knew he already knew the answer. But at the same time, I didn't know if I was ready to face it again. I took a deep breath. "I don't know what to think, John. I don't know what it means, what I'm feeling. All I know is that I feel great, an energy that's overflowing." He smiled slightly but didn't say anything else. His eyes remained fixed on me, as if waiting for me to make the next decision. After that day, I found myself more. And today, I live happier. Don't be afraid of someone judging or talking badly. The important thing is that you're happy. That was the story, my loves. What would you do if you were in my place at the time of the movie? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow, and bye-bye.